Okay, so the follow-up question, the first one of which is this. At the bottom of 30, the top of 31, how does Foe use language in order to emphasize the state's complicity in the case of police corruption? So we're looking here at this bottom section of page 30. Now, we're looking at these lines really from here onwards. The Minister of Internal Affairs and the Minister of Justice have decided that unless you can come up with a miracle, you will be made the severest possible example of. So this is the point at which, the maniac has a full control of the situation because he's managed to basically destroy their first testimony, or get them to. So the irony is that he fabricates this story to extract their lie. A lie and a deception extracts the truth about a lie and a deception. So we have, again, these layers of contradiction. And then they're panicking about, their being sacrificed. The maniac says, "You must provoke the kind of atmosphere in which we can justifiably demand greater repressive powers." And he quotes this and then asks them, "That's what they told you, right?" And then Pisani admits this, saying, "They were very persuasive." And then the superintendent joins in, saying, "The subhuman filth are threatening to engulf our beloved country." And then he quotes them again, "Society is falling apart." And so here, he quotes this sort of imagined or potentially real government discourse that exposes their complicity at the highest possible levels in a sort of conspiracy. We must provoke an atmosphere of domestic chaos, by planning the Piazza Fontana bombings, so that the government can then demand greater repressive powers on the back of this. And Foe here presents this as a right-wing conspiracy because he uses this slang terminology, camarade, which is like comrade, but tends to be used in sort of right-wing fascist circles. And then quotes this sort of very negative, sort of pseudo-fascist rhetoric about society falling apart and the government needing strong repressive measures to counteract that. The next question is, what's the effect of the maniacs resorting to the aggressive interrogation tactics of the police on the second half of page 31? Now, the maniac uses all this language of political animosity, crackdown on hooligans, blah, blah, blah. And then in the later sections of the page, the superintendent says yes, and then rushes out to the window and throws it open, and then forcefully suggests that they should jump out. Out, the pair of you. Your careers are ruined. Your children will spit as you pass. Your wives will disown you. Tradesmen won't serve you. You're abandoned. Your ridiculous lies have condemned you. Now, the climax of this sort of interrogation here is interesting because it completely mirrors their own tactics by trying to sort of invoke this raptus and suicidal impulse on the part of the police inspectors here. So the maniac here is mirroring their own aggressive tactics. And then the superintendent, ironically, mirrors the maniac. He says, I warned you, didn't I? Leave the script writing to the film directors, I said. But no, you had to blab your nonsense to the world. So again, we have this meshing of the two realms of supposed political reality and the authorities, and the theatrical world of the maniac and Dario Fo. And they seem to switch roles here, where the maniac's performing their role, and they seem to be emphasizing the performative nature of their own, and the categories are getting lost within this dynamic performance. The third one says, on page 31, the superintendent admonishes Pisani by saying, I warned you, didn't I? Leave the script writing to the film directors. Look carefully at the superintendent's suggestion for redeeming their reputations halfway down page 33. What has changed in the superintendent's attitude in the space of a single page of dialogue, and what point is Foe making about the moral principles of those in power? So we look over on 32. And we find the superintendent suggesting this. As he leaps, the superintendent grabs him and pulls him back in. So Pisani, leaping off of the balcony in the same way the maniac supposedly seems to have. He calls for a third version. So he's only saved him from suicide by further farcical lies. And this exposes that complete lack of principle that the superintendent, within the space of a page, is going back on this critique of fictionalized revisions of the original incident and is, proposing this. We'll have to do a third version here. Haven't we made enough of a mess of the first two? Let me go. Now, the superintendent says, we'll need your help, Your Honour. The benefit of your keen legal insight will produce a foolproof statement. This here is granting the maniac full control over this. And the irony of this is it now sounds like a kind of producer or script writer, despite his sort of earlier criticism of this. So we've got this full granting of the maniac of kind of creative power over this supposedly third performance of the original incidents that occurred. The fourth question is asking about the superintendent's language towards the bottom of his extensive speech on page 33. What's distinctive about the tense of his expressions and their grammatical modality, and how does this contrast ironically with the deceased railway worker? So, if we look at 33, at the beginning the maniac says, "You'll catch a chill. Are you going or not, sir?" "I suppose not." And the constable helps the inspector in. So there's this huge set of anticlimax in this, as their false testimony becomes more valuable to them. And the maniac says, "Very well, on with the dance." And so we have this great sense of performativity about this. And then the superintendent's line. Point 1, what's said cannot be unsaid. Therefore, it stands that you, Inspector, and I, or someone acting on our behalf, played the little deception. The suspect smoked his last fag, but did not throw himself out of the window because it was only 8 and not midnight. And everyone knows that railwaymen have a great respect for the timetables, which gives us all the time in the world to change his mood, iron out the wrinkles, and give him a convincing motive for jumping. Now, the formulation here of this new story, in spontaneous terms, is emphasized through the use of the present tense. It is emphasized through this sort of creative existence in the present that sort of grimly contrasts with the fate of the railwayman, whose life is very much in the past and doesn't exist anymore. And so we have this great sense that there of sort of grim, despairing irony about the fact that the railwayman is extinguished in relation to this sort of creative formulation of the story in the present.